Yeah, the devil's in the detail. There's always some complexity involved, but
Yep.
if you're aiming for simplicity at the outset, then you're going to do a lot better than, as you know, we discussed, kind of aiming for a big bang, eat the whole elephant approach to start with. But you know, the stakeholder leadership within the customer, you're absolutely 100% right, and not allowing it to get pulled into some committee and pulled out of shape and pulled into a giant thing. It almost needs to be like under the radar to a certain extent with this type of approach. But when I talk to MSPs, one of the things that I find interesting is the frustration that they have where they're trying to sell SoW solutions to maybe even really large organizations, and there'll be some stakeholders within that organization that are putting their hand up and saying, please help me, I've got a serious problem with this. But because the whole thing then expands out to be too large, it never happens. But those stakeholders, if there's a way to work with those stakeholders to start with, do you feel like that's an opportunity? Because I mean, have you seen enough people that would jump at the chance to do that?
Yeah, I think it's funny because like, yeah, one thing I write about law is always having a governance committee. You know, people from HRTA, procurement, legal, IT. That's your governance committee. Maybe it's just 5 people, and those are your key decision makers that can funnel and push back on everybody else and all the other noise that comes in. I think you have to have that, because if a procurement leader himself goes in and says, we're bringing in Zivio, and we're going to bring in this MSP, and they're just going to knock it out, and it's just going to be a real simple solution, you know, piss off a lot of people. So I think you have to have some level of governance and stakeholders that lead the charge, but it has to be the right level. And it has to be limited to a certain audience, because when it goes from 5 to 20 and suddenly now you've got all these different voices, okay, but those 5 people need to be able to funnel out all that noise and make the decision, because that's where the problems lie. People not making decisions or not knowing who's going to make that decision. So you have your RACI model of who those decision makers are. If you want to have 50 stakeholders, great. These 5 people from your client, from you, Mr. Client, are the ones that are going to make those decisions, and then they need to be accountable to that. So I think there's a way to approach it that can be done in a tactful way, but it can't be in a silo. But it needs to be you know, a nice balance of people across various parts of the organization keen on making a decision and coming to the table with that ability.
Yeah, and it's funny because, you know, when I talk to MSPs, sometimes when I kind of broach this area and look at it from this angle of what about a more agile, a faster, a simpler approach to just getting started and moving forward, quite often there's an initial assumption that this is going to be most applicable to mid-sized customers. But the interesting thing about it is, in a lot of cases, this is most applicable to groups, smaller groups within very large organizations, where moving the whole thing is going to be absolutely a nightmare and might never happen for the next 5 years or even longer. But within those big organizations, there are pockets of urgent problems that need to be solved.